This is vile. Read all.
Hello, how are we all doing today? It is a very lazy Sunday today. The Formula One's just finished, and I get to look at that later. Exciting times. But I'm going to be talking about. I'm going over some of the interesting videos that have happened this week, some topics that have arisen. Trump's money with Ben Shapiro and Destiny is something I'm going over first. It's nice to hear opinions on how people feel about Trump's income and this $400 million flight. Plane. He's a Boeing plane. He's been given by the Qatari. What are they? Monarchy? Empire? Tsar? I don't know. So we're going to be doing some of that as well. I'm going to look at other topics as well, but feel free to have a chat if you want to talk about some stuff. I'm going to be having a nice stream while doing some research. So there'll be a lot of faffing around, but feel free to chime in. I read the chat on both Rumble and YouTube. So feel free to jump in when you like.
Have been pretty upset on the right. We might have said that it was worthy of some coverage.
Watch Ben Shapiro has actually been critical of Trump for once. Yeah, I noticed he does this when Israel comes up.
We'll also be doing something about the medicine as well.
Does this mean that
Medicaid in the UK and America? That's going to be quite interesting.
It means there's still going to be tariff barriers, which is why I think that the stock market's jump today is maybe a little overstated. And as reality sets in, it's going to settle about back where it was, maybe a little bit lower than it was before Liberation Day, so-called Liberation Day. Here's Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, saying 10% tariffs remain here. They're not going anywhere.
So we do expect a 10% baseline tariff to be in place for the foreseeable future. But don't buy the silly arguments that the U.S. consumer pays. Businesses, their job is to try to sell to the American consumer and domestically produce.
This guy is evil. What was his background prior to this? Like, at least Bessent, you can tell when he's speaking. He looks like he's, like one of his balls are being crushed. Like, you can kind of tell that Bessent's like, I got to sell this somehow. This guy is just a total subhuman, disgusting. He's like the economics version of Stephen Miller. I hate this guy. He's shameless.
Products are not going to have that tariff.
However, the reason that the markets are in fact optimistic is because, as James McIntosh writes over at the Wall Street Journal, the grown-ups are in the room. The reason for the giant bounce in the stock market is because Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is now in control of trade policy and presumably in control of regulatory policy and tax policy as well. So, what exactly is Bessent still looking for? A deeper reform of the Chinese economy, turning it from a mercantilist exporter into a consumer and leading to more balanced trade. Now, again, that is going to be hard, but the reality is we are now avoiding the hurricane that was approaching, and I think the economy is responding to that in very good ways. So good for President Trump, good for Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Meanwhile, in other news, Idan Alexander, who's the last remaining alive American hostage who'd been taken by Hamas on October 7th, is set to be released today. Obviously, it's a deeply moving moment that Idan Alexander is coming out as a 21-year-old Israeli-American dual citizen. And he was kidnapped.
Ooh, now we see the true test of where Ben Shapiro's loyalties lie. Because I think that the Israelis, right, were mad about this because they somehow got the release of an American Jew, but all happened with the rest of the Israeli Jews. Is Ben Shapiro going to be happy about this? Or he's going to carry his AIPAC line and say this wasn't good? Uh-oh.
Clearly what Hamas is attempting to do is basically settle all outstanding business with the United States so as to then create separation between the United States and Israel in Iran negotiations. That is what is happening with the Houthis as well. It is not a coincidence that as the Houthis are basically forswearing attacks on American shipping, and the United States is saying that the United States is no longer going to worry about the Houthis, essentially. Now, Hamas is now trying to do the same by releasing the sole living American hostage in the Gaza Strip, trying to basically say that the United States now has no part in that conflict.
So I'm just taking notes.
Fine. I mean, if the United States has no part in that conflict, then Israel should just go and do what they need to do. That seems to me a proper solution with regard to the Gaza Strip. Now, the ugliest part, and there is an ugly part to this, is that there are...
Ugliest part. Hold on. Okay. What do you got? What's the ugliest part?
Widespread rumors and now news reports that Idan Alexander is going to be flown to Qatar to meet with the Emir of Qatar. This is vile. That's vile. He should, of course, meet with President Trump. He can do so in America. He can do so in Israel. There are plenty of places that Idan Alexander and his family can express their gratitude to President Trump, as well they should. Going to Qatar to meet the Emir of Qatar. Qatar is a terror sponsor country. Qatar is the #1 funder of Hamas. It is
That'll be interesting to look at. Qatar's dealings around the world. Let's have a little look here. Hang on. Isn't it annoying when you don't have a legit copy of Microsoft Office? I have to use the online version. I guess I could take notes. Bear with me 1 second. All right. So before we carry on, let's look a little bit at Qatar. I want to have a little bit of background on Qatar. Oh. Let's look at Qatar. There you go.
Today's Qatar is one of the smallest and richest countries in the world, mostly because of oil and natural gas, but it emerged as a nation decades before it could drill for any fossil fuels. The Qatari royal family, the House of Fani, faced opponents both at home and abroad as it united...
House of what? Fanny? Hang on, that's immature.
The Qatari royal family, the House of Fani, faced opponents both at home and abroad as it united Qatar. So then, how did they become the most powerful tribe on the peninsula and create the modern country? Who helped them? Who tried to get in their way? Ultimately, how did the state of Qatar get to exist? Well, Qatar isn't the only small monarchy on the Persian Gulf, and like Bahrain, Kuwait, and the 7 Emirates of the UAE, it came under the protection of the United Kingdom for about a century before independence. Unlike the rulers of those states, though, who controlled their lands before the Royal Navy arrived in the Gulf, Qatar's Al Thani are a newer player on the scene. In 1860, Doha, the luxurious capital of modern Qatar, had a population of only about 5,000
This is
people.
2 years old, this,
Most
so
of them
bear
worked as pearl fishermen, and the entire Qatari peninsula, including Doha, was nominally under the sovereignty of the Hakim of neighboring Bahrain, who himself was required by treaty to work with Britain to ensure safe trade in the Persian Gulf. The leader of Doha, and not...
Is it a British colony? Colony. Qatar became officially a British protectorate in 1916 after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. The sphere of influence of the British Empire started diminishing after World War II in Pakistan. So it isn't. Is it? Rise of the Thani family colonization Qatar by Britain. Right, okay. Naughty, naughty British. Oops-a-daisy. Every time there's trouble, the bloody Brits. As long as they didn't throw our tea in the water like the pesky Americans. Right. So Qatar officially became the British. Oh, right, so Qatar was not directly in British control, a British colony. However, it was a British protectorate from 1960 to 1920. Okay, that makes sense. Continue on. Look back history.
Much else at that point was the founder of Qatar's royal family, Sheikh Mohammed bin Fani, but Bahrain tried to exert more authority over him in 1867. That sparked a war between the towns Al Thani and the Al Khalifa of Bahrain. It eventually saw the
Khalifa's
Bahrainis
such
and
a
their
cool
allies
word.
from Abu Dhabi pushed back, at the cost of Doha being essentially burnt to the ground. But that sort of warfare was exactly what Britain was trying to stamp out in the region. Not out of humanitarian concern, mind you, but to protect trade routes to India. In fact, until Indian independence, Britain's Persian Gulf protectorates were under the jurisdiction of India's viceroy rather than London directly. The war was condemned by Britain's resident commissioner for the Gulf, Colonel Lewis Pelly, but he put the blame not on bin Fani, but on Bahrain's Hakim, who was replaced with his brother, and Bahrain was forced to renounce claims on Qatar. Then, in 1868, surrounded by the trappings of empire aboard the HMS Vigilant, Mohammed bin Fani, accompanied by other important Qatari chiefs, signed a treaty with Britain, securing British military backing in exchange for him keeping order in Qatar. Britain needed men like Mohammed bin Fani so as to impose apparently lawful and organized government on places that were traditionally decentralized. Using local leaders to handle day-to-day administration of territories was, in fact, textbook British imperial style. In the Gulf particularly, Britain wanted to crack down on piracy, supposedly supported by the Arab sheikhs. Equally, the Al Thani needed the Royal Navy's backing to make headway in asserting control over tribal leaders, the heads of extensive familial structures that for centuries had organized themselves not around an autocrat, but more consensus-based councils or majlis. Those who Britain termed pirates were more often than not actually combatants in disputes between.
Oh yeah, the World Cup. I forgot about that. Okay, so there's some things here. We can go about that later.
Disgusting to have a hostage who is taken by a group funded by Qatar go to Qatar to thank the Emir of Qatar for his freedom. That's an absurdity on its face. If it were to happen, it is wrong. It should not be facilitated by the United States. Qatar is the sponsor state of Hamas. In fact, if the Trump administration seriously wanted all hostages out of Gaza, they could do so tomorrow simply by telling the Emir of Qatar that the airbase in Qatar is going away and that it'll move to the UAE, which the United States could do. That should have been the approach of the Biden administration on October 8th. They should have said all the hostages come out or the airbase goes away. That's how closely tied together Qatar and Hamas are. Laydan Alexander is now 21. Hamas captured him when he was 19 on October 7th, 2023, of course. Now, all of this has some wider ramifications with regard to negotiations in the Middle East. Again, Steve Witkoff continues to...
Nico is dating Bianca Censori's sister. I don't even know who that is. But good for him, I think, maybe?
...say ridiculous things publicly. So Steve Witkoff, who again, I do not think is a good negotiator. I do not think that Steve Witkoff has demonstrated his bona fides.
He's kind of a retard, true.
So far, all of the hostage deals have essentially been kind of mediocre in the sense that maximum pressure has not been exerted on the bad guys. Yesterday, Witkoff said, we want to bring the hostages home, but Israel is not willing to end the war. Israel is prolonging it despite the fact that we don't see where else we can go, and that an agreement must be reached. There's currently an opportunity window we hope Israel and all the mediators will take advantage of. We're putting pressure on all the mediators and doing everything we can to bring the hostages home. It's not Israel's unwillingness to end the war that is leading to hostages being taken. That's like blaming the police for the kidnappers not releasing the hostages. No, actually, that's up to the kidnappers. Hamas could end the war today. They could have ended the war October 6th. It never had to happen in the first place. Meanwhile, all of this is part and parcel of broader negotiations happening over the Iranian nuclear program. According to the Wall Street Journal, the United States said it was encouraged by talks with Iran on Sunday after a meeting, but the two sides remain divided on key questions, including whether Tehran will be allowed to enrich its own uranium. Well, I mean, that is the key question. That is not one key question. That is the key question. The United States should have no interest...
That's Ye's wife? Wait, Sneeko is dating Ye's wife? Wait, what?
...in a deal with Iran where Iran continues to develop nuclear missiles. That is ridiculous. Anything that allows them the capacity to continue to develop nuclear materials, which can then be tied to their...
Oh, his wife's sister. Oh, okay.
...missile program is insane. The United States should not be party to that. That is the JCPOA. That is the thing that Donald Trump labeled the worst deal in history. The biggest story in terms of the media coming out this week is a story reported by ABC News, among others, that the Trump administration is now preparing to accept a super luxury Boeing 747-8 jumbo jet from the royal family of Qatar.
Uh-oh.
It is a $400 million gift available for use by President Trump as new Air Force One until shortly before he leaves office, at which time, according to the deal, the plane doesn't stay with the United States government. It then moves to the Trump Presidential Library Foundation.
Uh-oh.
According to ABC News, the gift had been expected to be announced when President Trump was on his visit to Qatar. A senior White House official said it's not going to happen in Qatar anymore, presumably thanks to social media blowback. President Trump put out a statement on Truth Social about the blowback, saying, so the fact that the Defense Department is getting a gift free of charge of a 747 aircraft to replace the 40-year-old Air Force One temporarily in a very public and transparent transaction so bothers the crooked Democrats, they insist we pay top dollar for the plane. Anybody can do that. The Dems are world-class losers.
Crooked
MAGA. So, again, the arrangement itself is, shall we say, I believe the technical term, the legal term, is skeezy. Sources told ABC News that lawyers for the White House counsel's office and the Department of Justice drafted an analysis for the Defense Department, concluding it's legal for the DoD to accept.
So what's he getting in return for this? Like, that's the biggest question. It's like, okay, you accept a plane, but they're not just going to give this influence. They're buying influence.
The Constitution literally says the U.S. government cannot accept official gifts from any king, prince, or foreign state. Apparently, Attorney General Pam Bondi and the top White House lawyer, David Warrington, concluded it would be legally permissible for the donation of the aircraft to be conditioned on transferring its ownership to Trump's presidential library before the end of his term.
Jesus. So
just say no, just don't accept it.
You probably do have everything.
I mean, Trump came out and said, made a golf analogy and said, someone's give you a gift, then you can't like not accept it. It's a kind of like it'd be rude not to accept it, but £400 million, that's enough to sway a small country's voting opinion. You know, get them a watch or something.
In your library, you're allowed to do whatever you want with it, I'm guessing. So it's not even really, it is being given kind of to the United States, but it is removed from the United States' possession. And then
so it technically means Trump can have it afterwards.
That's actually insane. I must be, I'm just not even, I don't care actually, because I must be misunderstanding that. I must be misunderstanding that. I must be. There's no way, right? There's just no way. There's no way.
And apparently Pam Bondi, who it should be mentioned at this point was once an actual FARA registered agent acting on behalf of the government of Qatar, provided a legal memorandum addressed to the White House counsel's office last week after Warrington asked her for advice on the legality of the Pentagon accepting such a donation. We'll get to more on that in a second. First, choosing Simply Safe for our students proceeded that allowed you to connect with these.
No thanks, Ben Shapiro.
Post jobs today. Talk to qualified candidates tomorrow. Let's start off with this. Qatar is not allegedly giving President Trump a $400 million jet out of the goodness of their sweet little hearts, no matter what Special Envoy Steve Witkoff says. They try to stuff money in pockets in totally bipartisan fashion. Just rewind a few years. While Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, Qatar gave $1 million to the Clinton Foundation for Bill Clinton's birthday, and didn't even bother to inform the State Department, as they promised they would do. So, again, Qatar will court anyone it thinks will have power, Republican or Democrat. It's an equal opportunity influencer, as long as you can help whitewash their image or smooth over the fact that they are, in fact, the world's largest proponents of terrorism on an international scale in terms of PR and in terms of putting money in pockets. Qatar likes to present a modern, Western-friendly face while shoveling money to Islamic terrorists under the table. This is a regime that has, for literally decades, funneled billions of dollars into the hands of Hamas, Hezbollah.
And
so it's still
Hezbollah?
CNN that despite Trump's claim that the $400 million jet from Qatar would go to his presidential library and not be used for travel, he plans to use it after leaving office. Yeah, obviously, duh. What, wait, hold on. If it goes to the presidential library and it's held there, what is the structure of that from an organizational point of view? Does that mean you don't even have to pay
they were
taxes on
interfering
it?
in the World
because
Cup
it's not
bidding.
even held by him personally as an asset.
So
I wonder
if
what
Trump's
the tax structure like.
Receiving money
or is
by
like
plane,
presidential
what kind
library
of
stuff.
influence? How much money did
The Taliban.
Qatar spend on influencing the World Cup?
It has strengthened Hamas's
bid?
grip on Gaza, provided them with the resources, and
And
yes,
how much did
enabled
that
terror
cost
attacks
them?
that killed
So
innocent
we get an
civilians.
idea of
Doha,
what
which
we're
is the
getting
capital, their
for
five-star hotels are
$400
basically
million.
retirement homes for Hamas leaders. Qatar has been credibly accused by the Treasury Department, by international watchdogs, by regional allies.
Just curious, was Ben Shapiro critical of the peace talks? By the way, when I say peace talks, I mean the surrender of the United States to the Taliban, because those talks were held in Doha as well. Did he mention any of that back then?
Of allowing financiers of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the Muslim Brotherhood to operate within its borders. This is a country that has repeatedly failed to crack down on terrorist financing, even after being pressured by the United States and its neighbors. In 2017, former Defense Secretary Robert Gates said, quote, "I don't know instances in which Qatar aggressively goes after networks of Hamas, Taliban, or Al-Qaeda." Qatar has, of course, transferred almost $2 billion to Hamas over the years, which, again, is one of the reasons it's so sick to send Idan Alexander to meet with the Emir of Qatar, if that's a thing that ends up happening. Here is the former Saudi foreign minister, again, not Westerner, Saudi foreign minister, Adel Al-Jubair, explaining the problems with Qatar.
The Qataris, since the mid-90s, have been sponsoring radicals.
I love the
This is what I
Saudi
mean
sheikh
when I
look.
say Saudi Arabia. These are not real countries with like militaries and shit. I don't know how
pretty
Qatar
boss.
is this itty bitty country. They're like does it border Saudi Arabia? Like it's right up there in the fuck. I always forget the name of that. The Strait of Hormuz is up there. Is it the Arabian Gulf? Why don't they terrorist attack them or do any crazy shit like that? Why don't they never do anything to them? Because they have nothing. They just stare at each other and do nothing. Look, what's going on up here? Nothing.
Ex-British.
This place
is
is
it a
not
protectorate?
real. Nothing
British is a
happens here.
protectorate since
This
the
is
fall of the
the
Ottoman Empire
origination
in
of the
World War
nothing
I.
ever happens guy. It's got to be this whole Gulf, okay? How can their interests be so unaligned? Maybe one day we'll research it, maybe.
They have been inciting people. They have become a base for the leadership for the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood, you have to keep in mind, is what begot us Takfir and Hijrah, which begot us Al-Qaeda, which begot us Al-Nusra. The Qataris allow their senior religious clerics to go on television and justify suicide bombings. That's not acceptable.
They don't like
The
that.
Qataris harbor and shelter
They're not
terrorists.
okay with
So
that.
I've grumble. I've got chat up with you guys
Yeah,
now.
that's the Sauds. So how does Qatar excuse all of this? Well, Qatar simply says they don't actually consider terrorist groups to be, terrorists. Here was the Emir of Qatar saying as much back in 2014.
Based.
No, we do recognize extremists.
Just deny it.
We believe that they're extremists. We believe that they're extremists, and we.
Carter doesn't believe. Hang on. Groups they are funding. Terrorists.
We don't fund extremists, but there are differences. There are differences that some countries and some people, that any group which comes from Islamic background are terrorists, and we don't accept that.
Okay, so some of the groups they don't consider to be terrorists would be, like all the ones we mentioned. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Taliban. Qatar essentially
It just
plays
so happens
both
they
sides of
are.
the table. They say they should be given leeway because they're the negotiation point for the West and terrorist groups, but then Qatar helps fund and house those terrorist groups, as well as doing the bidding of Iran. You know who
Let's
says
just listen
this
to that
at
statement
2014?
again.
Based.
No.
People. They have become a base for the leadership for the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood, you have to keep in mind, is what begot us Takfir and Hijrah, which begot us Al-Qaeda, which begot us Al-Nusra. The Qataris allow their senior religious clerics to go on television and justify suicide bombings. That's not acceptable.
They don't like
The
that.
Qataris harbor and shelter
They're not
terrorists.
okay with
That's
this.
not acceptable.
Again, that's the Sauds. So how does Qatar excuse all of this? Well, Qatar simply says they don't actually consider terrorist groups to be, terrorists. Here was the Emir of Qatar saying as much back in 2014.
Based.
No, we do recognize extremists. We believe that they're extremists. We believe that they're extremists, and we don't fund extremists. But there are differences. There are differences that some countries and some people, that any group which comes from Islamic background are terrorists, and we don't accept that.
Okay, so some of the groups they don't consider to be terrorists would be, like all the ones we mentioned. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Taliban. Qatar essentially plays both sides of the table. They say they should be given leeway because they're the negotiation point for the West and terrorist groups, but then Qatar helps fund and house those terrorist groups, as well as doing the bidding of Iran. You know who says this, actually? President Trump. There was President Trump on Qatar in June 2017.
The nation of Qatar, unfortunately,
The nation
has
of Qatar.
historically been a funder of terrorism at a very high level.
Yeah. You think Trump wrote
And in
this
the wake
speech?
of that conference, nations came together and spoke to me about confronting Qatar over its behavior. So we had a decision to make. Do we take the easy road, or do we finally take a hard but necessary action?
Sounds like we took the easy road.
We have to stop the funding of terrorism.
Guess we changed our
Okay,
mind
well,
on that one, huh?
How does Qatar combat these allegations? The answer is they spread the money everywhere. Everywhere.
Yeah.
According to the Network Contagion Research Institute, Qatar is by far the single largest donor to American universities since 9/11. By far, it's not close. You want to talk about foreign influence operations? This would be that. They're not
Ooh.
doing that because they're so
That's an interesting. What do they actually fund in American universities? So the largest funder in American universities. Sorry about my spelling. I'm doing about 5,000 things at once.
sweet and nice. Why exactly would they sign these giant checks unless they got something in return? Here is the Prime Minister of Qatar this week explaining to the Georgetown Doha campus, yes, Georgetown has a campus in Qatar, that the service of Qatar had to be their guiding light as part of a greater national project on behalf of Qatar.
Yep.
أوصيكم اليوم
Says today, he said in
Qatar is basically nobody talks about it because nobody even knows what this country is. I think of Outlaw Star when people say Qatari. So I mean, like, I don't even blame people, but
Outlaw
nobody
Star,
knows
isn't it
anything
the
about this
horse?
country in the U.S. We don't talk about it. We don't do anything about it. But they are everything when it comes to funding and being subversive in schools. Just imagine like what the Nazis say Jews do. That's what Qatar actually does.
I heard you swear God in your conscience.
And by the way, when I say base, I'm being ironic. It's not base. It's super f***ed up and not good.
And let the service of the nation and its people be your guiding light. And maintain your faith in yourselves. In a time where transformations are accelerating and crises are deepening, from the Gaza tragedy to regional tensions, Qatar reaffirms its commitment to mediation and diplomacy as a means to protect civilians. And credibility is built through continuous action. Okay, so what exactly is he saying? He says they're churning out people who work for Qatar. Okay. The greater national project doesn't end at Qatar's borders. Their influence matters. That is why Georgetown University, which has a branch in Doha, just gave a medal to a Qatari.
I'm not playing this game, by the way. I'm
Sinwar,
just
the head of
listening
Hamas after
to
October 7th.
Destiny talk about
Qatar
Ben
is also
Shapiro.
What do you mean by that? As in, Qatar funds a ton of subversive media and influence stuff that is not like reported by FAR and shit for U.S. schools and everything in the United States.
Of Al Jazeera, the pro-terrorism media network that spreads anti-American, anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic bile across the Middle East. Meanwhile, the Qatar Investment Authority, QIA, controls, according to the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, between $500 billion and $1 trillion in assets. And they use those assets to put themselves in positions of influence. So, for example, in August 2023, the Qatari Sovereign Wealth Fund bought the Park Lane Hotel in New York for $623 million. Okay. The company was owned by Steve Witkoff's company. The company had been in limbo. Park Lane Hotel was in limbo for 6 years following the attempted seizure of the hotel by the DOJ, thanks to corruption charges against one of the original owners, a guy named Lo Take Zhou. So when Steve Witkoff says that he really, really likes the Qataris, well, I mean, he does have some warm relations with the Qataris.
I think in the case of the Qataris, they're criticized for not being well motivated. It's preposterous. Wow. They are well motivated. They're good, decent people. What they
That's
want
their only
is
criticism.
a mediation that's effective, that gets to a peace goal. And why? Because they're a small nation and they want to be acknowledged as a peacemaker.
Taking sacks of goodies from people who support Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood, Al Jazeera, all the rest. That's not America first. Like, please define America first in a way that says you should take sacks of cash from the Qatari royals who are behind Al Jazeera. It just isn't America first in any conceivable way. So, back to the original question. Is this good for President Trump? Is it good for his agenda? Is it good for draining the swamp and getting things done? The answer is no, it isn't. It isn't. If you want President Trump to succeed, this kind of skeezy stuff needs to stop. And here's the thing. It's already having an impact. It's already having an impact. Quick example. Last week, the Senate considered a procedural vote on the so-called Genius Act. This is an act that should have had wide bipartisan support. The Genius Act helps deregulate the crypto industry, an area that's vital for America's economic development.
Good.
As you all know, I'm a big fan of crypto. I own Bitcoin, some Ethereum. If you want to watch me explain why
How is it not
crypto is
already
fascinating and useful, check out my
a
YouTube video
regulated
on the subject.
security?
And I know a ton of people in the crypto industry who've been ecstatic about President Trump's deregulatory approach to the subject, which is awesome. But the bill was shot down last week because, at least in part, Democrats said they wouldn't vote for the thing because of President Trump's use of crypto himself. Y'all remember President Trump launching $Trump crypto 3 days before taking office as president.
Yeah,
Trump
that's
himself
kinda
announced
weird.
the Trump crypto on X and Truth Social. He described it as a meme coin, meaning it had no inherent value. It was just there for the kind of bleeps and
Even
giggles.
though meme
The
coins
price
are a great
spiked
way
to
of
trading
making
value of
money.
nearly $13 billion, making it the
$13
19th most
billion.
valuable cryptocurrency on planet Earth. And then it proceeded to plummet, like really, really dive. The project allegedly netted people associated with it, meaning the Trump
It's called a
organization
pump and
associated with
dump.
the Trump crypto, some $350 million.
Couldn't happen if it was
80% of the
regulated.
outstanding supply of that meme coin is still held by insiders, presumably members of the Trump organization. Overall, according to data shared with CNBC, there were 2 million wallets that bought that Trump meme coin. 764,000 of them lost money. 58 wallets made more than $10 million. And then in April, that Trump meme coin announced that the top 220 holders of the meme coin would be invited to an intimate private dinner with President Trump.
Oh
and
my
his golf club.
goodness. So what, they're
The
paying
top
for
25
influence?
were invited to a VIP White House tour. According to Bloomberg News, 19 of the top 25 holders of that Trump meme coin that have registered on the website's leaderboard have bought the coins using foreign exchanges that claim to exclude U.S. customers, which means that foreigners are buying a lot of the meme coin and then getting meetings with President Trump, and VIP White House tours and all the rest.
What?
This raises the question of
No.
influence peddling. If
That's
you basically buy a bunch
ridiculous.
of Trump meme coin,
Wait, have I given him credit for this?
How's that
before?
legal?
He said it raises the question instead of it begs the question. Good job.
President Trump, and VIP White House tours and all the rest. This raises the question of influence peddling. If you basically buy a bunch of Trump meme coin and then funnel money to organizations associated with President Trump, so you can have dinner.
It's interesting
with
to hear
Trump.
Ben
Doesn't it look
Shapiro
great?
being
Democratic
criticism
senators, of course,
of
immediately
Trump.
announced
It
that
kind
they
of
wanted
adds a
an
nice
ethics code. They
balance
sent
to
a
the
letter
Conservatives.
saying, quote, this latest action raises grave ethics and legal concerns, including the severe risk that President Trump and other officials may be engaging in pay-to-play corruption by selling presidential access to individuals or entities to include foreign nationals and corporate
Pay-to-play
actors
corruption.
with vested interest in federal action while personally enriching the president and his family. That might be overstated, but let's be clear, some people do seem to be investing in the Trump meme coin for the access. I mean, there was literally a CEO of a company called Freight Technologies that just bought $20 million worth of Trump meme coin, which I gotta say is not like the most solid investment. What was the explanation? Quote, we believe the addition of the official Trump tokens are an excellent way to diversify our crypto treasury and also an effective way to advocate for fair, balanced, and free trade between Mexico and the United States. It's like to impact policy. Again, not the least skeezy thing I've ever heard. Now, listen, maybe all of this is overblown. Maybe it's all nonsense. Maybe some of it's not true. And I understand some of it's being reported by legacy media outlets. But again, here is the question. Does any of this help advance the president's agenda? You know, the agenda that we all voted for, the agenda we want to see implemented. Does this make his presidency stronger or weaker? Now, I'm going to repeat again. I don't know whether this activity is criminal in any way, but things do not have to be criminal to hurt the agenda. If you want
it doesn't have to be
Trump's
absolute
succeed,
criminal to
taking jets
ruin
from Qatar
tarnish
is
the
not
name of
way.
the Conservative
Taking real
Party.
estate deals from Qatar is not the way.
Oh.
The largest obstacle to any administration is scandal. From Watergate to Whitewater, scandal-plagued administrations have a really tough time gathering the political capital necessary to actually effectuate their agenda. And that's why it's unbelievably important that the Trump administration avoid scandal. That is the reason I'm worried about this stuff. Yes, I think inherently it is bad. I do not think this is good. I think if we switch the names to Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, we'd all be freaking out on the right.
True.
Let's say if Qatar was giving Joe a $400 million jet for his use at his presidential library after his presidency, or if Hunter launched a crypto firm with the son of Anthony Blinken and then launched a series of crypto...
Like, people don't talk about this shit enough because they're so obsessed.
Imagine if Barack Obama had ended up with a £400 million jet of any sort of influence over the Afghanistan conflict.
Obsessed with the nuclear war in Pakistan and India, or they talk about nuclear war potentially with like Russia or Ukraine. I think the biggest threat when it comes to like a nuclear winter or some sort of like catastrophic event would be if a Democrat comes into office and starts doing even half the shit that Trump did. Conservatives all over the United States, their brains will undergo nuclear fission. It'll be over. It'll be like the people getting dropped out of the planes and Attack on Titan and turning into Titans. Their brains will explode in like the most catastrophic battle. We'll never come back from it. It'll be unrecoverable.
Crypto products in which mysterious strangers, including foreigners, were investing. Oh, wow, that crypto firm was being regulated by Joe's administration. We'd all have been pretty upset on the right. We might have said that it was worthy of some coverage.
I just love how careful. He's like, we'd be pretty upset. And we'd say maybe, probably would take some coverage. Like, this is... What was the overall amount of money that Hunter Biden supposedly made from
like
Burisma?
10 million?
Wasn't the total amount of money
like $10
million?
Yeah.
Like the total amount.
Total million. He wasn't even directly
years.
the part of the Biden
government. It's a $400
government.
million jet. Like, oh my God.
Now, as I say, again, it could...
Wait, how much money did Hunter Biden make in
Well, it was his company,
Burisma?
wasn't it? It was Hunter Biden's company that took the money.
From 2013 to 2018. Oh, it's not even just him. Hunter Biden and his firm earned $11 million. Over the course of 5 to 6 years, his firm earned $11 million. Oh my God.
Could be all of these reporters, all of them. Maybe it's all just a misreading of perfectly innocent business. Sure. It's possible. But the point is this. President Trump has enemies all over the place. He has people seeking to take advantage
You should take nothing from Qatar.
His media
I mean, I'm annoyed that they stole the World Cup bid,
another
but,
impeachment.
you
And
know,
I
I'm
promise you,
petty.
I promise you, if these issues begin to dog his administration, Republicans will lose Congress. It's that simple. Republicans are this close to losing Congress anyway. And then, whatever President Trump hopes to do, whatever agenda we all voted for, will be DOA. The investigations will never end. There will be more impeachments. All of that will happen.
I can see if
policy is too important
Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez takes a £400 million plane
President Trump was
from,
elected based on the American people being
I don't know,
sick and
Puerto
tired of
Rico.
Tired of Hunter, tired of the Clintons, tired of the Biden crime family. Why in the world would President Trump
Bolivia.
have this sort of vulnerability? Again, more importantly, why would those of us who voted for him, who gave to his campaign...
Like, I would just love to hear, okay, Biden crime family. How much money do you think Trump has made off of that cryptocurrency?
And his hats and what else? His
That in and of
Bibles he was
itself
selling?
supersedes like
Books.
every single potential claim, like all the total value of all accused corruption, probably in the history of almost every single politician in the United States. Like, I don't blame Americans. There's a big issue of scale here that people just aren't understanding in terms of how much money we're actually talking about, because millions, billions, and trillions are like the same dollar amount to everything, and in the average person's mind, because we just don't deal with these numbers, firsthand. But the scale of the amount of money that we're talking about here is just on another level. Like, how big do I want to do this? I wonder if this plane is worth... No, fuck. I wonder how much the Kennedys, that whole family's worth. I was gonna say, I wonder if just the plane alone is worth more. Well, what is the net worth of all the... let's check real quick. Net worth, I'm going to guess. I'm going to guess the net worth of Barack Obama. I'm going to guess under 100 million. I'm going to say 40 million. That might be really low. I wonder how much money they made like selling books and speeches. Could be higher than that. Could be 100 million. I'm going to guess 40 million. Damn, 250 million. Okay, it's higher. All right. Well, according to Wikipedia, Money Magazine estimates his net worth at 1.3 million. Wait, what is Barack Obama's net worth? Forbes said 70 million. We're going to go with that. Forbes is a more reputable. Okay. All right, 70 million. It wouldn't surprise me if this plane was worth about as much or maybe half as much as like the net worth of every single president in the history of the United